Is Marie Ferreira. So Marie is a specialist speech and language therapist in Trafford, where she works as part of the local authority's early years service. Her role primarily involves overseeing Trafford's Giving Voice Award, which is a programme of training and support for early years providers to equip practitioners with professional development needed to enable the speech, language and communication development of young children. It's fantastic to have Marie with us today, and I will hand over to you to deliver the session. Thanks very much, Marie.
Thank you very much for that, Hugh. It's a real pleasure to be able to take part in this series of presentations around supporting language development in Year 1. I really appreciate being here today. And as Hugh said, today the focus is on tip 4, which is focusing attention and listening. So I'm hoping over the next sort of 30 minutes or so to be able to engage your attention and keep your focus as we cover this topic. So we're going to consider the vital importance of attention and listening skills in enabling speech, language and communication development. We're going to look at the broad stages of attention development and some of the observable behaviours that you may be seeing in children you work with at different stages of their development, how a difficulty with attention and listening impacts on the presentation, how a child may come across in the classroom and implications for learning, and of course some strategies and activities to help focus attention and listening in Year 1. Now, to start with, I'd like to begin by sharing a very short video clip courtesy of L-Clan, who I'm sure many of you are aware of or know, and they offer a range of speech and language training courses. And then there'll just be a couple of quick questions following watching the video. So I'm just going to put my tech powers or lack of tech powers to use and share the video with you now.
How to make a delicious rich chocolate cake. You'll need 200 grams of plain chocolate, 200 grams of butter, 200 grams of brown sugar, 100 millilitres of sour cream, 2 eggs, 200 grams of self-raising flour, 5 tablespoons of cocoa powder, and hundreds of thousands to decorate. Put the chocolate, butter and sugar into a large pan with 100 millilitres of hot water and stir gently.
Okay, so then my question for you, which I'd be very surprised if you could answer, is how many people got on the train? Anybody like to hazard a guess? Now, it's not an easy question to answer, and I'm not expecting anybody to know. It was actually 9, if anybody picked up on that. Of course, there were 2 messages being spoken at once. And really, I suppose, thinking as well how even though that was only a 30-second clip, how maybe that made you feel just listening to those 2 messages being spoken at once. So you may have felt things like a bit of confusion, perhaps kind of zoned out, or what's going on. I can't focus on one or the other. I'm a bit frustrated by this, a bit stressed or anxious maybe, and that was just in 30 seconds. And really, that clip was just to highlight how challenging it can be to listen and focus attention when there are multiple messages to tune in and out of, and perhaps just gives a very slight glimpse of what it could feel like for a child with a specific difficulty with their listening and attention. So listening skills, listening and attention forms a fundamental building block to language development, and this is often visually represented with various models that we use in speech and language therapy to explain how language develops in children. And some examples are pictured here. This communication pyramid format is often used. And what we can clearly see, what's highlighted on each of these pyramids from different areas here, is that listening and the ability to sustain attention is really one of the earliest ingredients, if you will, in developing these skills, and it paves the way for later skills and language abilities to develop. So things like our understanding of language, expressive language skills, being able to use words and sentences, thinking as well about speech, clarity of speech, and of course literacy development, and just general well-being and development in all areas really. We know language is the cornerstone for that, and with listening and attention skills playing a vital role early on in helping support the development of language. And then if we think more specifically about how a difficulty with attention and listening impacts on communication, I'm again here referencing LCLAN and their communication chain, which is a really excellent visual representation of how all the skills, of all the skills and processes that are involved in communication, from input right through to output. So you can see in the green there, we've got receptive language, so that understanding of language, and expressive language, the use of language. And the chain here is the real key. And at the start there, we've highlighted the sort of 3 key ingredients to for attention and listening behaviours. So things like look and attend, interpret non-verbal communication, and listening and hearing. And an inability to use these skills has that domino effect on enabling other processes further round the chain to work effectively. So in particular, attention and listening difficulties can significantly impact on memory, so the ability to hold information in short-term memory, which then impedes the ability to store information to long-term memory, which then in turn has an impact on understanding of language, understanding words, understanding sentences, and being able to decipher a meaning within an incoming message when information is presented. And of course, the breakdown doesn't just end with receptive language skills. It then has that knock-on effect to output or expressive language, because it can impede the ability to have those ideas, to be able to generate those ideas, have that bank of knowledge of words in order to draw upon, decide what to say, structure sentences, just generally leading to that struggle in knowing what to say and how to say it. And so for children experiencing these difficulties, of course, this manifests as significant difficulties coping in a learning environment. Oh, I can't seem to share my, I can't seem to go on to the next slide for some reason.
Is there Marie, is there a notification at the top of your screen? Oh, it's moved on now.
Yeah, sorry about that. There was a notification, yeah.
I think someone accidentally tried to press share screen, so I think.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay, no worries. That's fine. I thought my laptop had frozen on me. Okay. So it's worth us just reflecting very briefly on what we're actually asking of children when we ask them to do good listening, or when we ask, is everybody listening? As Eleanor Johnson, in an article that she wrote for Teach Early Years, she kind of broke this down and went through it, and of course she concluded that it's a very complex process and it's quite a big ask, because what we're really asking children when we're asking them to do good listening, we're asking them, can you hear my voice? Can you listen to the words I'm saying? Can you look at me or the object? Can you filter out background noise, distraction, other people talking, environmental sounds, distracting things going on? Can you clearly see the visual stimuli? Can you break down my sentences and understand their meaning? You sustain all of this at the same time for a reasonable length of time in order to fulfill the task, in order to do what it is you've been asked to do. So we're actually asking children to engage in several processes in unison. We want them to look, hear, listen, focus attention, remember, understand. And with all these processes hanging finely in the balance of an optimal listening environment, so minimal distractions, the child's internal state and their mood, their cognitive abilities, it's no surprise that children can struggle to listen and therefore access learning. And of course, now more than ever, we're acutely aware of how remote learning from home will be impacting on a child's ability to focus, as home has now become school, the classroom for many. So what can we do? What can we do to support attention and listening development? Now, one of the key things to do is to actually establish a child's level of attention development. So we're going to look at the stages or levels of attention development. Learning to listen progresses through a series of stages. First sort of coined by Joan Raynell back in the 1970s. But to this day provides a really useful framework when reflecting on a child's level of attentional control, and more importantly, the strategies that will be really helpful for that level. Now, children of year 1 age should typically be at the mature level, should be at the integrated attentional control level, but many aren't, and don't be surprised if they're not. And you know, we can sort of reflect on the impact of COVID in terms of you know, limiting that ability for children to progress through their attention and listening levels. And we are hearing lots of anecdotal evidence around the impact of COVID on listening skills in particular. So one thing to do when thinking about a child's level of attention development is to consider which level best suits the child's attention development based on where they are at most of the time. So attention levels for all of us will fluctuate. You know, if somebody was to open the door where you are now, you'd turn and you'd look, and you'd instantly, your attention would be fleeting. And so it's about really establishing the most predominant level that you feel a child is at. And crucially, it's about developing that strong understanding, particularly now, of the home learning environment in relation to listening opportunities, routines and distractions. So having those discussions with parents and carers around a child's attention level, highlighting behaviours that are typical and that are expected at that stage, to provide some context and some insight and some sort of reasoning for behaviours that parents may be seeing at home, and just to really highlight how focusing on supporting listening and attention can really help with that child's ability to develop language and of course to learn. And you could also do some comparison and some problem solving around what you're seeing in the classroom versus what's seen at home, which I'm sure, you know, there'll be differences, of course, because they're different environments, and trying to problem solve around what's working well and what the challenges may be, and how you can adapt learning tasks and activities to suit the level of attention. So we'll go through these levels now, and some observable behaviours. So typically acquired during the first year of life, we've got fleeting attention. So as the name suggests, a child will be very easily distracted for anything they may see, hear, smell, and they'll move straight to whatever it is that's caught their attention very quickly, almost involuntary, and find it very difficult to focus on one activity. And to understand verbal directions and instructions at that stage will also be a really difficult task. And there may also be little awareness of danger. Moving on, acquired typically between ages 1 and 2, you've got rigid attention. So again, as the name suggests, they focus on their own activity, following their own agenda very intently, and can maintain that interest for long periods of time. They may not be interested at all in your choice of activity, or rarely respond to you when they're concentrating on their task. And so that could be interpreted as they're ignoring you, they're being willful. Why won't they focus on what it is I want them to look at? And this is very typical of a rigid attention stage. And to attract their attention, often you have to use gentle touch in order to physically show them that you're there and there's something you need them to look at. Then we move to single channeled attention, typically between the ages of 2 and 3. So here a child is preferring to focus on an activity they choose still, but with adult support they can move on to another activity more easily. But when they're engaged, as with rigid attention, they often don't carry out directions or respond when you talk to them, but they're a little bit more flexible with their attention than they previously were. To get the child to do something, you have to stop them playing, working on what they're doing, and then tell them, and calling their name before they will do things, of course, is a useful strategy. Into sort of the second stage of attentional control, and the levels here, we've got focusing attention, typically acquired again between around 3 and 4 years old. This is where the child will join with an activity that you or another child is choosing and suggesting. They're interested in what's going on, and they can respond much quicker than before when you are asking them to do something. You may still have to call their name, of course, but they can be much more flexible with this focusing attention stage. Then comes two-channeled attention, typically acquired during the reception year between ages 4 and 5. And here a child can do 2 things at once, but for relatively simple activities and tasks. And they can shift their attention to listen to you without you having to call their name first, typically. So that's one of the key differences between two-channeled and the earlier stages, is that they can do that without that verbal prompt. And finally, as we said, the mature stage would be integrated attention, typically acquired in year 1 between ages 5 and 6. So now you've got the ability to focus on doing 2 things at once for longer periods of time in different places, and crucially for more complex tasks. And as it states there, that children can control and focus their attention on what you want them to do, or what they are asked to do independently. Of course, as we've said, don't be surprised, children in year 1 aren't yet at this stage. So hopefully that table is useful in just outlining those levels and some observable behaviours, and I'm sure you may have children in mind that you know, as we've gone through those stages briefly, thinking about where children you work with may be in terms of their attention control. And in terms of behaviours that we commonly observe and are commonly quoted for children that have attention and listening difficulties, I'm sure none of these will come as any surprise to you, but behaviours such as appearing uninterested, being highly distractible, fidgety, very easily frustrated, of course requiring instructions to be repeated as they may forget what to do, which of course impacts on their understanding. Following what their peers are doing, so kind of watching, following, appearing 1 step behind because they've not picked up the instruction themselves. They are following rather than leading on that instruction. They're taking in only bits and pieces of information as they tune in and out of focus. The child may daydream or display anxious behaviours, or they may behave in a way to create distraction. Of course, children with attention and listening difficulties will struggle to contribute during carpet time and with following instructions when carpet time is finished, and they then have to move on to complete the task. Okay, so how can we focus attention and listening in year 1? Like with developing any skill, there must be, of course, plenty of opportunities for practice woven through the daily school routine. And crucially now as well, those opportunities for meaningful and accessible home practice provided to families, where the importance of attention and listening is really highlighted to families. Of course, we can develop attention and listening skills through encouragement and praise, and by using really highly motivating activities, incorporating a child's interests wherever possible, and above all, making tasks fun. I just wanted to provide some general support strategies, which I'm sure will be no surprise to you to read through these, but these strategies again may be really useful for families just to be reminded of in terms of supporting not only attention and listening development, but also language learning as well. So things such as, before you're giving any verbal instruction, ensure you have gained the child's attention. calling their name, touching them on the shoulder if required, encouraging them to look as a crucial component to attention and listening. Looking is really important. Presenting information in simple steps or chunks, using short, simple sentences with lots of pauses. Using a slower rate of speech than you would perhaps normally, and obviously a clear, animated voice. Stressing key parts of an instruction, and being mindful of the child's mood, internal state, how tired they are, etc., so that the activity and expectations are adjusted to respond to how the child is feeling at that time. And as we've said, knowing what really motivates and interests the child as a route to engage in their focus. And then some more specific strategies. Encouraging whole body listening is great. I'm sure some of you know, many of you know about whole body listening, but it's a strategy from the social thinking approach developed by Michelle Garcia Winner, and it really breaks down the fairly abstract concept of listening by explaining how each body part reacts and responds other than the ears when we are listening. So it focuses on the brain and how the brain, when we're listening, is thinking about what is being said, based on the idea that when we are asking someone to listen and thinking about what we're saying, we're in essence asking them to the listener's brain to connect and tune in with ours. The eyes, they are looking towards the speaker. The mouth is quiet. The body is facing the speaker, and the hands and feet are quiet and kept to oneself. So whole body listening can be a really effective strategy, as well as sharing general listening rules, which I'm sure you'll have in your classrooms, and if they're positioned in key areas around the classroom, that's brilliant. Referring to them frequently, of course, and using that consistent language to keep and foster that shared understanding of what we mean by the listening rules. The fidget toys, so many children will benefit from the use of a fidget toy, and there are many of those self-regulation tools out there that can help support not only listening and attention, but of course self-regulation and calming in children. A whole range out there, from stress balls to malleable putty. I'm sure you've got lots of ideas yourself. Okay, one thing we often suggest in speech and language therapy, a key strategy and therapy technique for us would be around making things visual wherever possible. So the idea with making something visual is that it's a permanent reminder, of course, another means of getting the message across. It can, a visual support can help children to retain information as they move from input to the task at hand, and of course keeps them on track, gives that predictable reminder. One thing to say about visual supports is to bear in mind a child's level of visual understanding as well, before making a choice around what kind of visual to use. So, for example, in the early years, we may rely initially on photographs, before, of course, we're moving on to things like coloured line drawings or black and white line drawings, which are a little bit more abstract. So in year one as well, you may also be thinking about how accessible is a particular visual to a child. Do they need something a little bit more concrete, rather than your typical abstract visuals that you might be using with the majority of children. And some examples, as you can see on the slide, we've got things like natural gestures and signing, of course, are a visual means. Visual timetables, and now a next board or a first and then board to support that predictability in knowing what's happening now and then what is going to come. A working for or a working towards board can be, of course, highly motivating. Jotting down keywords on a separate board. And colour coding to help group ideas, again, just some examples. And also the zones of regulation is again a visual support as well as a whole approach in itself, but just even that basic concept of using the colours from the different zones in order to help children to identify how they're feeling and linking that to their focus and attention and listening, and trying to again foster that shared understanding around when you're in the green zone, that means you're focused and ready, and actually if you shift from those points, what can we do to get you back to that optimal learning zone. Okay, so some further strategies, something that I found really useful when working with teachers and teaching assistants in the past, thinking about working on language activities. We would also think about trying to incorporate purposeful movement activities into language tasks or learning tasks. So the idea with the purposeful movement would be to combine sensory regulation, focus, motivation, and make learning really fun, where the focus is on adapting delivery of tasks rather than stopping a task entirely, as that helps obviously to sustain and extend a child's ability to focus. So just a few ideas here, things like asking a child to travel to collect a word, a letter or a card, post it into a post box, lifting or dragging items from one place to another, for example during shape work in maths, and physically having to carry out instructions. So the verbal instruction maybe go and get 2 big triangles and put them under the box, and the child has to lift up the box to do it, as well as obviously get the 2 big triangles. Highly motivating games, something like marble run is always a winner, I find. So things like that, especially where it's engaging hand-eye coordination and concentration as well for some children. You know, thinking about placing target pictures, letters, shapes that are being worked on at the top of, say, the marble run box. The child carries out the task after they've rolled the marble. It's just giving that extra element to tasks. Of course, a multi-sensory element can always be really effective. Drawing letters or shapes and shaving foam in a tray. Again, you're getting that feedback from you know, that sense of smell and touch as well, or forming shapes in Play-Doh or kinetic sand. Just some. Another great one is when listening to stories, allocating the characters in the stories, the names of the characters in the stories, actually replace them with the names of the children. So when the character name comes up, the child has to jump up or make some other signal that you've agreed between the group. Listening sticks as well are great. So both listening sticks and that kind of allocating those names to story characters really kind of increase that buy-in, that take up to listen, because children know that something's expected of them, and it's a great motivator. And the listening sticks would have the children's names written on them, and then what you would do is ask a question about the learning focus, pull the stick from the jar, and the child whose name is on the stick has to answer the question or attempt an answer. And some great learning strategies would, you know, to help encourage all children to use and to monitor and praise each other for doing and for trying, would be things like encouraging children to ask for repetition when they haven't heard or they haven't understood an instruction, and really, you know, sort of setting that precedent that that's okay to ask, and you know, we all need to do that along the way. And also encouraging verbal rehearsal of instructions. So one thing that I know I've suggested in the past is the idea of once a child has heard an instruction, they then physically put it in their head. So they may tap their head to rehearse. They rehearse the instruction and they put it in their head. They're storing that to memory by using that physical prompt. Of course, movement breaks can be really effective in supporting attention and listening. So that physical activity that ties in with the routine of the school day. Positioning at carpet time, so Where a child needs that additional support to tune in, the optimal position would be for them to be in the middle of the group, falling under your gaze, so you can easily remind them to listen, rather than them on the edges of the carpet where they can fiddle with the carpet or pick up bits from the floor or whatever it might be, or look around for further distractions. Of course, that's dependent on your physical space, and if you're in a big open plan or you've got lots of windows, it's tricky. But there's some general positioning guidance. And then again, just thinking about various variations of listening, attention and memory games within small groups. And one of the advantages, of course, of the current situation is that children tend to be working in smaller bubbles and smaller groups, where these games are more accessible for children that are struggling, as the group size is smaller. So things like variations of I went to the market. Here's an example with a number square or a number line, where a child recalls a number and then the next child has to recall what their friend has said and add their own number, and that can be obviously adapted to suit any learning aim or topic vocabulary at all. And then something like the brain game as well. So again, thinking about recalling items in a category, and then pointing to the brain of the next child or head of the next child, gently touch them on the side of the head to signal it's their turn. So just adding that fun physical element really in with everything else. So I think that is that's me done in terms of the main bulk of the presentation. I've just got a list of some suggested resources just to briefly go through. Of course, I've referenced LCLAN here within the presentation, so we know obviously they're an evidence-informed accredited training course organisation. There's some e-learning options available now. Wellcome and the Wellcome Toolkit has the big book of ideas within it, so the intervention section, of course, and with working closely with the early years version, there is now a primary version out as well. The early years version of the big book of ideas has the attention and listening section to refer to, so if any of your early years colleagues have that to hand, you may find that some of those listening and attention activities are great for your year ones as well. The National Literacy Trust, in particular, their literacy apps around supporting listening and attention. The BBC's Tiny Happy People campaign. Now, typically, of course, that's it's sort of focused on the early years, but they do have attention and listening activities in there that would be great to share with families, particularly if they've got younger children, as a way of incorporating some of those within the family. There's a link to social thinking there, a bit more about whole body listening. The Communication Trust's Listen Up resources are again brilliant, really accessible for parents, loads of ideas there. And a couple of books that you may be aware of, may already have in your toolkit. Active Listening for Active Learning by Carolyn Player and Maggie Johnson, and Teaching Children to Listen by Liz Spooner and Jackie Woodcock. And that's the end of my presentation. I think I can stop sharing screen now. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Very fantastic. Thank you so much for that. We've had some questions come in through the chat already.
Okay, great.
So I'll scroll up and direct them to you. But if anyone else has any further questions following Marie's presentation, please do pop them in the chat now. Or if you prefer to raise your hand, feel free to do so and we'll come to you. So I'm just going to pop up to William first, who's just asked, what are some of the causes of a perceived decline in children's ability to listen and be attentive?
Well, I think thinking about the current COVID climate and the potential causes, I suppose essentially it's thinking about the situations that families have found themselves in. So, the various different adjustments to working and home life and school life that we've been, that we've all had to adapt to. So say, a family is at home having to work from home, also do some homeschooling, and thinking about, how is that all balanced? How do we factor that all in? That in itself can almost, if we think about it in terms of like a demands and capacities, like a weighing scales, you've got a lot of demands there that are placed on the family and the home environment. And so the capacity for everybody to have that quality time to interact and listen and take time to just be with each other is really, you know, really challenging. That would be one of the key things that you know, we've picked up on because of the current situation.
Thanks, Marie. That's great. And we've got a question from Stephanie saying, how can we focus EAL children with no or little English? I know there's visuals and stuff, but is there any other tips alongside visuals? EAL children.
A lot of the strategies are very useful for EAL children as well. So of course visuals would always be the go-to, and lots of simple listening, language, and turn-taking activities. So just to encourage that ability to be part of a group, to get involved. And listening games are great because they often don't necessarily require a verbal response. Sometimes if it's a listening game where they can respond non-verbally, maybe by picking up a picture or taking something out of a bag or doing some sort of movement, it's, you know, supporting those listening skills in that way can help just increase confidence and well-being, and all the time they're hearing the English input as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And we've got a question from Nicola as well. I'm conscious it's probably a bit boring you all hearing my voice. Nicola, are you there to ask the question? I don't want to put you on the spot if you've got your microphone off, but if you're there to ask the question, that'd be great. If not, I'll read it out happily. No, that's very fair. Okay, so Nicola's asking, with the whole school having different break times because of not mixing bubbles, there is often outside noise coming into the classroom, and with the windows often open, it's often worse. Any tips for this problem to ensure children are not distracted?
It's a really tricky one, isn't it, that, Nicola? Because physically trying to control all distractions can feel like a really impossible task. And I suppose my answer, and it's probably not what you're looking for, is just the best case scenario that you can possibly achieve within that. An area that, you know, is often quieter, and, you know, you're saying about not being able to mix bubbles and different break times and things like that. It's really difficult. I suppose it's just trying to factor in the focus activities, or where children need that additional support, trying to factor that time within a quieter time during the day, so that if they're needing that extra input, that's being done at the quietest time that's humanly possible. Sorry, that's perhaps not that helpful.
We've had another one in from Dominique just now. I don't know if you can see that, Marie, but that's any tips on bringing parents on board and helping their children to develop in language and attention. So currently trying to establish positive relationships, and any tips would be much appreciated.
Yeah, so I guess, Dominique, the thing is really we often do in some of the training that I deliver, we look at things the sort of the four P's of adult learning, which is sometimes quite useful. So really things like presenting information in a way that's meaningful and makes sense to the family, and they can actually see has an impact to their situation, their life, their daily living. So whenever we're suggesting, oh, we need to work on this, it's always taking it back to how we present the information, and how it's woven into what that family does or needs, and that they have opportunities to, of course, practice. And I suppose as well, sharing the IEP and targets in a really accessible way. So where possible, no, it's probably not that possible at the moment with the current COVID situation, but demonstrating where possible, sharing video examples. So it's not just written information on a sheet all the time, and it's actually that demonstration as well.
Great, thank you, Marie. So And Dominique's looking into it. Oh, looking into a suggestion from William about the Bolton 5 golden rules for communication. So I don't know if we've seen them before, but I'm sure if you could share them with us, William, we'd be happy to share more widely if that's of use. Fantastic. Have we got any more questions for Marie? We've got 2 minutes left. Oh, there you go. Thank you, William. That's very helpful. We've got 2 minutes left. Have we got any more questions for Marie, or shall we look to kick off the weekend in style? Fantastic. Well, I'm going to take that silence as a sign of a very, very good presentation. Thank you so much, Marie. That was really, really useful and fascinating, and really appreciate your time on the call today. Big thank you to everyone for attending. We're going to put an evaluation link into the chat now. We'd be really grateful if you could fill it out and just give us a bit of your feedback. We're next meeting on Tuesday for another webinar. So that webinar is going to be on vocabulary. And then on Wednesday, the 27th, we're going to have one on phonological development. So those are our final two as part of the webinar series. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming at the end of such a busy week. Have a very lovely and deserved weekend, and I hope to see you all soon. Thanks.